Hi, everyone, and welcome to part two of our interview series with Oliver Lucanus in our latest YouTube series, Between Two Tanks. So, if this is your first time watching, Between Two Tanks is a series where a member of the Fluval team sits down one-on-one with a distinguished, respected member of the aquatic community to ask questions that you, our social media followers, ask us to ask them. So, on that note, Oliver, welcome back to part two.
Hi everyone, glad to be back.
Glad to have you back. So if this is the first time you guys are tuning in, we will link to part one of our interview with Oliver. And if you're not familiar yet with who Oliver Lucanus is, Oliver, you are our Fluval Conservation Ambassador. You're an aquatic expeditioner. You're an event lecturer, university researcher, photographer, videographer, livestock seller. Have I missed anything?
No, no, I'm confined to this room just like all of us, so
Yeah. Well, we call Oliver he's our Swiss Army knife of aquatic experts that we know and deal with. So, Oliver, it's you're a great first guest to have on this series, and we're happy to have you back.
thank
So, now that we've reintroduced you and established your impressive credentials, why don't we get right into the questions that came from our Fluval social media fans?
sure, go ahead.
So number one, I think this is actually a really interesting question. Some people know that you obviously take a lot of photographs of fish in the wild, but do you have any tips for hobbyists who want to take great photographs of fish within an aquarium environment?
Sure, I think that if we separate the three types of cameras people are using, let's get the phones out of the way. I think we all notice that the phones, because of their wide angle cameras, you have to get the phone as close to the glass as possible. Uh,
So
the
avoid
rest of
that
it,
glare.
yeah, I think that to take a good aquarium photo, you need something a little bit better than a phone. So let's look at a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. And I think that there's a couple of key things you can do. So the first thing is if you have an external flash or a flash that is mounted on the camera, the most important thing is to get that flash away from the camera because you want the film plane and the plane that the fish is in to be parallel to each other, but you
Right.
want the light to come from somewhere else. Ideally, the light is coming from a 45-degree angle, a little bit upwards and a little bit down.
Mhm.
And this is a radio transmitter. Almost every external flash that you can mount on a camera also has the ability to receive a radio signal, and they are not so expensive. This is the Canon one, but you can get this for any flash. It allows you to put the camera, you mount this on the camera, it allows you to put the flash somewhere else, either on top of the tank or on a tripod so that it can angle down from the front a little bit. And I think that's one of the key things. The other thing that is key is a diffuser. So this is a flash that has a diffuser, and it's a piece of plastic that's only a couple of bucks. You can actually take a piece of opaque, you could take a yogurt cup and tape it to the front of the flash.
Mhm.
What that does, it disperses the light of the flash so you don't
Okay.
get these hard shadows. I think those are two main things, but maybe this is a subject that's interesting enough so that we could do some more detailed video about this.
It's a question we often get. It's a question that I've seen often on the web too. So there's some great tips there. One thing for us, even for social media purposes, I mean, we have, in our fish room, we have obviously professional equipment, but even sometimes, a cell phone is all you have when you're out somewhere. So I think some tips there too for the average person that may not have this equipment, even if you're just using your cell phone, we find, make sure you're not kind of pinched in or zoomed in because any kind of movement will get exaggerated. And that's the other thing is trying to keep that cell phone steady. So sometimes even just kind of bringing your phone up to the glass directly, and using your hands up against the glass will help stabilize that. Or if you have a little tripod or even just leaning your arms on yourself or on a piece of furniture might help to keep that image steady because that's obviously important.
Yeah, I think it's also good if the room is as dark as possible and the tank as bright as possible.
Right, great tip.
The other thing is we all rely on the autofocus of our cameras a lot, and that works great when it's, you know, your dog running around outside in bright light. But I think if you have a camera that can actually manually focus, it's a good idea to focus at a certain distance that you're sitting at and move your body in and out instead of trying to have the camera pick up a moving fish. So you would lock the focus on, let's say, 2 feet away from the fish, and then instead of trying to make the autofocus catch the fish, you move your body in and out, and when the fish is in the focus plane, you can hit the shutter button. Sometimes with a camera that doesn't have very good autofocus, this can produce really good results.
Cool, great tips. So we'll move on to question number 2. Is there an ideal place to position a CO2 system on an aquarium?
I think that the best way is to get it in a place where the diffused gas that is coming off the diffuser is going into the water as much as possible. So under the exit of the filter, whether that's a canister filter or a hang on the back filter, you want the water that is coming out of the filter to transport the CO2 bubbles into the water of the aquarium as much as possible. If it's in a very still area of the tank, the bubbles will just rise straight to the top and it can off gas more quickly.
Right. Okay. The next few questions here are actually related to specific species, and they're pretty interesting. So the first one is, are there any smaller fish that sift sand? I find it awesome when larger fish do it, but I only keep smaller tanks. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's a whole bunch of choices. So my choice from Asia would be the horse-faced loach. It's a relatively small fish that gets along great in community tanks. It will bury itself completely, and it's constantly sifting sand through its gills. I think it's one of the most fascinating fish to watch. We'll get a picture up here so you can see what it looks like and the scientific name too. If we look at African fish, I think Pelvicochromis cichlids, so the Crebensis group of cichlids from West Africa are pretty good. If you like the Rift Lake cichlids, I think the shell-dwelling cichlids, so Lamprologus from Lake Tanganyika, and there are some that are very small that make their houses in shells and actually bury the shells in the substrate. Those are quite amazing. And when you look at South American fish, the obvious one is Geophagus, but they get very large. So I think that the smaller species of cichlids are good there also, like Ramirezi or like Biotoecus or Biotodoma. I just made a video about Biotodoma in the wild, and you can see a little bit. It's like a Geophagus, but it stays much smaller, so it will max out at about 4 or 5 inches.
Good. Well, thanks for pointing that out. We're definitely going to link to your resources below. So if you want more information, make sure to check out the video description for that. Next question. What can be done to curb populations of invasive common plecos?
I think we have to look a little bit about the history of invasive species. So aquarium keepers themselves are not the biggest culprit. So I think number one is probably the sports fishing industry. They have caused the ecological disaster in Victoria by introducing the Nile perch that has eaten most of the endemic species into extinction. There is also a considerable problem with people using fish and introducing them for pest control. You know, we come third in that, where, for example, jewel cichlids from West Africa have been introduced in a lot of places that have hot water springs, in Austria or even in Mexico. So have tilapia, and so has the pleco, unfortunately. Once an invasive species has taken hold in a habitat and is starting to produce in large numbers, it's very, very difficult to get rid of it. Yeah. So I think something we need to do is, number one, is educate aquarists that if they want to get rid of a fish, to not release it in a similar environment in their home city.
Absolutely.
You know, I think that education has a lot to do with it. Beyond that, there are some NGOs that are trying to eliminate invasive species, but it's a very, very difficult task. And it doesn't just go for fish. It's also, if you look at reptiles of various species being on the loose, or the lionfish being on the loose in the Caribbean reefs.
Thanks for that, Oliver. So as our final question, what are your thoughts about keeping stingrays in captivity?
I think stingrays are not really ideal aquarium fish, and there are several things behind that. For one, they get very large, and all of them need very warm water, or at least most of the species. So, you need to have an aquarium that is 300-400 gallons, and you need to keep it warm enough. And the other thing is that these fish don't eat prepared foods very well, so they need to have either frozen food or live food, and that can get expensive. If you have a fish that's 3 feet in diameter, it will need, a pound of shrimp every couple of days. So I think it's something that you need to keep in mind, is that these fish have very big appetites and get very large.
And even the teacup stingrays can get quite large, can't they?
Yeah, so pretty much all of the species, with maybe the exception of the Nana, which is the dwarf stingray, but that is also probably the most difficult species to keep in the aquarium. I think that it's something that they are certainly interesting fish at first, but I think it's something that needs to be well calculated before you get into something as complex as that.
Yeah, definitely know what you're getting into before you buy, right?
Yes.
So Oliver, there's our latest 5 questions. Again, we're trying to keep these interviews kind of short and sweet. So I want to thank you again for joining us. Always a pleasure talking to you. We love your insight and wisdom. It's always appreciated.
Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, and thank you to our viewers for watching. If you want to learn more about Oliver, as I mentioned before, we're going to include links to his resources in the description below. Also, be sure to follow Fluval on social media so you get your questions asked of our future Between Two Tanks guests. And last but not least, and most importantly, if you like this video, please give us a like. Please subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you can be notified when we upload new content. Thanks again, everyone, for watching. Take care, and we'll see you next time.